The howling winter wind rattled the windows of the small cabin as Emma Anderson stared at the calendar on the wall. The date, December 23, 1878, circled in faded red ink. Outside, the Wyoming Territory was buried beneath 3 feet of fresh snow, and inside, her 2 children slept fitfully, dreaming of a Christmas that Emma feared wouldn't come. Not the way they deserved, at least. Emma tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear and pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. 3 months had passed since her husband died, leaving her alone with 6-year-old Sarah and 4-year-old Thomas on their small homestead just outside of Laramie. 3 months of struggling to keep the farm running, to keep food on the table, to keep going when all she wanted to do was crumble beneath the weight of her grief. The children had been asking about a Christmas tree for weeks now. Back in St. Louis, before they'd moved west chasing dreams of land and opportunity, Christmas had been a grand affair with relatives, feasts, and decorations. Out here, with no money to spare and miles separating them from their nearest neighbors, Emma had resigned herself to a simple Christmas, some small handmade gifts, maybe special biscuits with preserved fruit if she could manage it. But the tree. The children's faces fell a little more each day when they woke to find no evergreen standing in the corner of their modest home. "When's Pa coming back with our tree, Mama?" Thomas had asked just that morning, his innocent question piercing Emma's heart like an arrow. "Pa's not coming back, remember?" Sarah had said, her small voice carrying the maturity of a child who'd had to grow up too quickly. "He's with the angels now." Emma wiped a tear from her cheek as she glanced out the window at the vast expanse of white. The nearest pine forest was 5 miles to the north, across Crawford's Creek, which would be frozen solid this time of year. 5 miles through knee-deep snow alone, with wolves known to prowl the area. She made up her mind then and there. Her children would have their Christmas tree. The following morning, Emma rose before dawn. She dressed in Layer's woolen undergarments, her sturdiest dress, 2 pairs of stockings, her late husband's coat that hung nearly to her knees, and his boots stuffed with rags to make them fit her smaller feet. She wrapped a scarf around her neck and lower face and pulled on a knit cap. "Mrs. Perkins will look in on you midday," she told Sarah as she prepared a simple breakfast of porridge. "I've left lunch wrapped on the table. Mind your brother and don't open the door for anyone but Mrs. Perkins." "Understand?" "Yes, Mama," Sarah said, her eyes wide with concern beyond her years. "But where are you going?" "I have an errand to run," Emma said, trying to sound casual. "I'll be back before sundown." "Is it about Christmas?" Thomas asked excitedly, porridge dripping from his spoon. "Maybe," Emma said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You'll see." After breakfast, she tucked an axe into a sling she'd fashioned from rope, filled a canteen with water, and packed a small bundle of bread and jerky. She hesitated, then took her husband's revolver from its box on the highest shelf, checking that it was loaded before tucking it into her coat pocket. She hadn't fired it since James had taught her years ago, but the wolves wouldn't know that. "Be good," she said, kissing each child's forehead before stepping out into the biting cold. The sky was the pale blue of early morning, and her breath created clouds in the frigid air. Emma's first steps were tentative, the snow reaching midway up her shins despite the path she'd cleared just days before. Each step required lifting her foot completely and planting it down again, an exhausting process that she knew would only grow more difficult as she moved away from the homestead. She set her sights on the dark line of trees visible on the horizon and began her journey. 2 hours into her trek, Emma's determination was tested by the relentless cold and the physical exertion of trudging through the deep snow. Her legs burned, and her face stung where it was exposed to the wind. But she kept going, thinking of Sarah and Thomas's faces when they would see a tree adorned with the paper ornaments they'd been secretly crafting when they thought she wasn't looking. She'd just reached the crest of a small hill when she spotted movement in the distance. She froze, her hand instinctively moving to the revolver in her pocket. But as the figure drew closer, she realized it was a man on horseback, moving at a careful pace through the snow. The rider spotted her and changed course, heading in her direction. Emma tensed, uncertain whether to continue forward or retreat. Out here, strangers could be friend or foe, and she was too far from home to run if this one proved dangerous. The horse and rider drew closer, and Emma could now make out details. The man was bundled against the cold, a cowboy hat pulled low over his face, his broad shoulders dusted with snow. He rode a sturdy chestnut horse that seemed unbothered by the weather. "Madam," the man called out as he approached, tipping his hat slightly. "What in heaven's name are you doing out here alone in this weather?" "I might ask you the same," Emma replied, her hand still near the revolver. The man chuckled, a warm sound that seemed at odds with the frigid landscape. "Fair point. I'm Colin Everett. I've got a small ranch about 10 miles south of here. Was checking my northern fence line for breaks when I spotted you." Emma studied him. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the western sun. His eyes, a striking blue against his tanned skin, held no malice that she could detect. "Emma Anderson," she said finally. "I'm headed to the pine forest." Colin's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "That's still 3 miles off, Mrs. Anderson. And if you don't mind my saying, that's no short journey for a lady alone in this snow." "It's a necessary one," Emma said firmly. "And it's Miss Anderson now. My husband passed in September." Colin's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. May I ask what's so urgent at the Pines?" Emma hesitated, then decided the truth was as good as any explanation. "A Christmas tree. My children, they've had little enough joy these past months. I won't let them face Christmas without at least that small piece of normal." Colin was silent for a moment, then dismounted in one fluid motion. "Let me help you." "That's not necessary," Emma began. 5 miles each way through this snow, carrying a tree on the return," Colin interrupted gently. "I admire your courage, Mrs. Anderson. Pardon, Miss Anderson, but that would challenge even the hardiest frontiersman. Let me take you the rest of the way on horseback. We'll find your tree and get you home before your children even know you're gone." Emma wanted to refuse, to prove she could do this on her own, just as she'd been doing everything since James died. But the man's offer was sensible, and the thought of riding instead of walking through more miles of snow was undeniably appealing. "Thank you, Mr. Everett," she said finally. "That would be most helpful." Colin smiled, revealing a small dimple in his left cheek. "Colin, please." He adjusted his saddle and offered her a hand up. "This is Thunder. He's strong enough to carry us both and your tree without complaint." Emma took his hand, trying to ignore the warmth that spread from his touch even through their gloves, and allowed him to help her onto the horse. Colin swung up behind her, keeping a respectful distance while still providing stability. "Where's home for you?" he asked as they set off toward the Pines. "A small homestead about 2 miles east of Crawford's Creek," Emma replied. "James Anderson's place." Colin asked, surprise evident in his voice. Emma turned slightly to look at him. "You knew my husband?" Colin nodded. "Not well. Met him in town a few times, helped him break a horse last spring." "Good man. I heard someone had passed out that way but didn't know who. I'm truly sorry for your loss." The sincerity in his voice touched Emma in a way she hadn't expected. "Thank you. It's been difficult. I can only imagine. You have children, you said, too. Sarah's 6, Thomas is 4. And you've been managing the homestead alone since September." There was no judgment in his question, only admiration. "We get by," Emma said simply, unwilling to admit just how precarious their situation had become. The small amount of money James had left was nearly gone, and while she'd managed to harvest enough from their garden to see them through winter, she wasn't sure what spring would bring. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of snow beneath Thunder's hooves and the occasional call of a winter bird. Emma found herself relaxing slightly, the solid presence of Colin behind her oddly reassuring. The pine forest, when they reached it, was a welcome sight. The tall evergreens stood like sentinels, their branches heavy with snow, creating a natural cathedral of white and green. Colin dismounted first, then helped Emma down. "What size tree were you thinking?" "Not too large, I'm guessing, if you plan to carry it yourself." "Something small enough to fit in our cabin, but full enough to look festive," Emma said, surveying the trees around them. They wandered through the forest, Colin leading Thunder by the reins. Emma examined each potential candidate with care, wanting to find the perfect tree for her children. "What about this one?" Colin suggested, pointing to a young pine about 6 feet tall, its branches evenly spaced and full. Emma circled it, nodding appreciatively. "It's perfect." Colin handed her Thunder's reins and removed his gloves, tucking them into his pocket before retrieving the axe from her makeshift sling. "Stand back a bit," he advised, and with practiced swings began chopping at the base of the tree. It took only minutes before the tree came crashing down with a soft thud against the snow. Colin quickly trimmed the base to create a flat surface, then looked up at Emma with a smile. "One Christmas tree as requested. Thank you," Emma said, returning his smile. "The children will be thrilled." Colin secured the tree to Thunder's saddle, and they began the journey back to Emma's homestead. The snow had started falling again, large flakes that drifted lazily from the sky, adding a fresh layer to the already deep blanket covering the ground. "Do you have family waiting for you, Colin?" Emma asked as they rode, curious about this kind stranger who had appeared when she needed help most. "No family," he replied. "Not anymore. Lost my parents years ago and my brother in the war. It's just me and a few ranch hands these days." "I'm sorry," Emma said softly. Colin shrugged. "I've made peace with it. The ranch keeps me busy and I've got good neighbors. Speaking of which, I don't recall seeing you in town. Do you get to Laramie often?" "Not since James passed," Emma admitted. "It's a long journey with 2 small children and—" She trailed off, not wanting to reveal the full extent of their isolation. "And winter makes it nearly impossible," Colin finished for her, saving her from having to explain further. "Well, now that I know you're out here, I'll make a point to check in when I'm riding this way." No one should face the frontier alone. The offer was made casually, but Emma felt a rush of gratitude that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, blaming the cold wind. As they crested a hill, Emma's cabin came into view, smoke curling from the chimney against the gray afternoon sky. The sight of home filled her with relief she'd done it. With Colin's help, she would bring her children the Christmas tree she had promised herself they would have. Colin dismounted and helped Emma down, then carefully untied the tree. "Where would you like this? Just inside would be fine," Emma said, moving ahead to open the door. "Sarah, Thomas, I'm home." 2 small faces appeared at the door, eyes widening at the sight of the massive tree and the tall stranger carrying it. "A tree," Thomas shouted, jumping up and down. "Mama got us a tree." Sarah's reaction was more reserved, her eyes moving suspiciously from the tree to Colin. "Who's that man, Mama?" "This is Mr. Everett," Emma explained, brushing snow from her coat. "He helped me bring home our Christmas tree." Colin set the tree in the corner Emma indicated, then removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair flecked with silver at the temples. "Pleased to meet you both," he said, crouching down to the children's level. "Your ma is quite the determined lady, walking all that way for your tree." "You walked in the snow for us, Mama?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with concern. Emma smiled, hanging her coat on a peg by the door. "Only part of the way. Mr. Everett was kind enough to give me a ride on his horse for the rest." "Can I see your horse?" Thomas asked eagerly, already moving toward the open door. "Thomas," Emma admonished, "it's too cold to go out without your coat." "Another time, young man," Colin promised with a warm smile. "I should be heading back before the snow gets worse." Emma felt a twinge of disappointment at his imminent departure. "At least stay for some coffee to warm you before your journey." Colin glanced out at the steadily falling snow, then nodded. "That would be welcome, thank you." Emma busied herself at the stove while the children peppered Colin with questions about his horse, his ranch, and whether he knew any outlaws. Colin answered each query with patient good humor, his deep voice filling the small cabin with warmth that had nothing to do with the crackling fire. "How many cows do you have?" Thomas asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "About 100 head," Colin replied, accepting the steaming cup Emma offered him with a grateful nod. "Plus horses, chickens, and one very ornery goat who thinks he runs the place." Sarah giggled, warming to their visitor. "What's the goat's name?" "General," Colin said with a straight face. "Because he gives all the orders." Both children dissolved into laughter, and Emma found herself smiling more genuinely than she had in months. There was something about Colin Everett that put everyone at ease, a quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. As he sipped his coffee, Colin glanced around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings and the carefully mended curtains. His gaze lingered on the small shelf of books, the handmade quilts on the children's beds, the collection of drawings pinned to one wall, all the small touches that made this house a home despite the obvious signs of struggle. "You've done well here," he said quietly to Emma as the children began examining the tree, discussing where to place the ornaments they'd made. "We manage," Emma replied, the words becoming something of a mantra. "More than manage," Colin corrected. "This is a home, not just a shelter." That's no small achievement out here. The simple recognition of her efforts brought a lump to Emma's throat. "Thank you," she managed. Colin finished his coffee and stood. "I should go while there's still daylight." Emma nodded, though part of her wished he could stay longer. "Of course. And thank you again for your help today. I'm not sure I would have made it there and back on my own." "You'd have found a way," Colin said with conviction. "You seem like a woman who doesn't give up easily." He donned his hat and coat, said goodbye to the children, and headed for the door. Emma followed him out onto the small porch. "I meant what I said earlier," Colin told her as he untied Thunder from the post where he'd secured him. "I'll check in when I'm riding this way. And if you need anything before then, anything at all, my ranch is the one with the red barn about 10 miles south." "That's very kind, but no buts," Colin interrupted gently. "Neighbors help neighbors out here. It's how we all survive." With that, he mounted Thunder and with a final tip of his hat, rode off into the swirling snow. Emma stood watching until horse and rider disappeared from view, an unfamiliar feeling stirring in her chest. For the first time since James died, the weight of sole responsibility felt slightly lighter, as if somehow shared. Inside, Sarah and Thomas were already planning where to place their paper chains and pinecone ornaments on the tree. Their excitement was infectious, and Emma threw herself into the preparations, helping them arrange their decorations and adding sprigs of dried berries she'd been saving for a special occasion. That night, after the children were asleep, Emma sat beside the decorated tree, its presence transforming their humble cabin. In the soft glow of candlelight, she allowed herself to think about Colin Everett, his kindness, his gentle manner with the children, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. It had been just one encounter, she reminded herself. One act of neighborly kindness that she shouldn't read too much into. And yet, as she drifted off to sleep that night, it was Colin's face she saw, and for the first time in months she felt a flicker of something like hope. 2 days later, on Christmas morning, the children woke early, their excitement palpable as they opened their simple gifts, wooden animals Emma had carved in stolen moments, new mittens she'd knitted from wool she'd unraveled from one of her old shawls, and peppermint sticks she'd traded eggs for with Mrs. Perkins from the neighboring farm. "This is the best Christmas ever, Mama," Sarah declared, hugging her new doll fashioned from scraps of fabric and stuffed with dried corn husks. "Even better than St. Louis?" Emma asked, surprised. Sarah nodded emphatically. "Because we're together and we have our tree and everything is perfect." Emma swallowed past the lump in her throat. "Yes, everything is perfect." After breakfast, as the children played with their new toys, a knock sounded at the door. Emma opened it to find Colin standing there, his arms laden with packages wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "Merry Christmas," he said, his cheeks red from the cold. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Emma said, stepping back to let him in. "This is a surprise." Colin stamped the snow from his boots before entering. "I was headed to the Wilsons' place for Christmas dinner and thought I'd stop by on my way." The children, hearing a visitor, came running. "Mr. Everett," Thomas exclaimed, "did you come to see our tree with all the decorations?" "I certainly did," Colin said, setting his packages on the table. "And it looks magnificent. You both did an excellent job." Sarah eyed the packages curiously. "What's that, Sarah?" Emma admonished. "It's not polite to ask about parcels that aren't for you." "But these are for you," Colin said, looking slightly embarrassed. "All 3 of you. Just some small things I thought you might need or enjoy." Emma was speechless as Colin handed each child a package. Thomas tore into his immediately, revealing a carved wooden horse with a real horsehair mane. "It's just like thunder," he exclaimed, examining the details with wonder. Sarah opened hers more carefully, gasping when she uncovered a small book of illustrated fairy tales. "My own book," she whispered, running her fingers over the colorful cover. Colin handed the largest package to Emma. "This is practical, I'm afraid. Nothing as exciting as toys or books." Emma unwrapped it to find a thick woolen blanket, soft and warm, in a deep blue color. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gift. "The nights get cold," Colin said simply. "And there's coffee and sugar in that smaller package. I remembered you were running low." Emma blinked back tears, overwhelmed by this unexpected kindness. "I don't know what to say. This is too generous." "It's Christmas," Colin replied with a shrug, "and I had no one else to spoil." The children were already engaged with their gifts, Thomas galloping his wooden horse across the floor while Sarah turned the pages of her book with reverent care. "Will you stay for Christmas dinner?" Emma asked impulsively. "It's nothing fancy, just a rabbit stew and some biscuits, but you'd be welcome." Colin hesitated, clearly torn. "I promised the Wilsons I'd join them." "Of course," Emma said quickly. "Another time, perhaps." "I'd like that," Colin said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Very much." After Colin left, promising to return soon, Emma found herself moving through the day in a kind of daze, her thoughts continually returning to the tall cowboy with the kind eyes and thoughtful gifts. That evening, as she tucked the children into bed, Sarah asked sleepily, "Is Mr. Everett going to visit us again, Mama?" "I believe he will," Emma replied, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Good," Sarah murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "He makes you smile, like Pa used to." Emma froze, startled by her daughter's perception. Had she been smiling more? Perhaps she had. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. Comforting to know joy might still be possible, unsettling to acknowledge the source of that joy was a man she barely knew. In the days that followed, Emma found herself watching the horizon more often, a part of her hoping to see a familiar figure on horseback approaching. True to his word, Colin returned 4 days after Christmas, bringing with him a sack of flour and news from town. "Thought you might like to know what's happening in the wider world," he said, as he helped Emma store the flour in her nearly empty bin. "The stagecoach was through yesterday, brought the newspaper and mail." He stayed for dinner that time, entertaining the children with stories of his adventures as a young cowhand in Texas, while Emma listened, fascinated by glimpses into his life before Wyoming. "What brought you all the way up here?" she asked as they washed dishes together after the meal, the children playing quietly by the fire, Colin's hands stilled momentarily in the wash basin. "After the war, I couldn't settle anywhere. Drifted north, worked ranches in Colorado, then Wyoming. When old man Fletcher decided to sell his place 4 years ago, something just felt right about putting down roots there." "Do you ever regret it, settling in such a harsh place?" Colin considered the question. "The land is harsh, yes, but there's an honesty to it I appreciate. It doesn't pretend to be easy. It demands respect and hard work, and it rewards those who understand its nature." He glanced at her. "I suspect you understand that better than most." Emma nodded. "James used to say something similar. He loved this land, difficult as it can be." "He chose well," Colin said quietly, "both in land and in a wife strong enough to carry on his dream." Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks at the compliment. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." "That's precisely what makes you remarkable," Colin replied, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. Colin's visits became regular after that, once a week, sometimes twice, always bringing some small necessity or treat for the children. Each time, he stayed a little longer, helped with a few more chores, shared a few more stories. Emma found herself looking forward to these visits with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. She hadn't expected to feel this way again, this lightness, this anticipation, this awareness of another person that seemed to heighten all her senses. Winter deepened, bringing January blizzards that howled around the cabin for days on end. During one particularly fierce storm, Colin arrived unexpectedly, his horse and himself nearly invisible beneath a coating of snow. "Colin," Emma exclaimed, hurrying him inside, "what are you doing out in this weather?" "Checking on you," he said, his teeth chattering as he removed his ice-encrusted coat. "Haven't been able to get through for almost 2 weeks. Was worried." The simple admission that he had worried about them had risked the dangerous weather to ensure their safety touched Emma deeply. "You could have frozen to death," she scolded, pushing him toward the fire and pouring him a cup of hot coffee. "Worth the risk," he said, accepting the coffee gratefully. His fingers brushed hers as he took the cup, sending a now familiar spark through her body. The storm raged for 3 more days, making it impossible for Colin to leave. He slept on a pallet by the fire, helped Emma with indoor chores, and taught the children card games and riddles to pass the time. By the time the weather cleared enough for travel, it felt as if he had always been part of their small family circle. "I should get back," he said reluctantly on the morning of the 4th day, looking out at the blindingly white landscape. "The hands will be worried and the cattle need checking after that blow." "Of course," Emma said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Thank you for everything." Colin turned to her, hesitation written across his features. He stopped, seeming to struggle with what he wanted to say. "I've enjoyed these days despite the circumstances." "So have we," Emma said softly. "The children will miss you." "Just the children?" Colin asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Emma met his gaze directly. "No, not just the children." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily since that first meeting in the snow. Colin took a step closer, close enough that Emma could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I'll be back soon," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "Very soon." February brought a brief thaw, turning the snow to slush and making the roads passable again. Colin suggested a trip to town, offering to drive Emma and the children in his wagon. "It would do you good to see something besides these 4 walls," he argued when Emma hesitated. "And you mentioned needing supplies." The journey to Laramie was slow but pleasant, the children's excitement infectious as they pointed out every animal track and interesting rock along the way. Emma found herself relaxing, enjoying the scenery and Colin's steady presence beside her on the wagon seat. Laramie was bustling with activity, townspeople taking advantage of the milder weather to conduct business and socialize. Emma felt suddenly self-conscious of her mended dress and the children's well-worn clothes as they navigated the muddy Main Street. Colin, seeming to sense her discomfort, placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "You look fine," he said quietly. "Better than fine." His words bolstered her confidence as they visited the general store, where Colin insisted on adding several items to her modest list of necessities. "Colin, I can't accept," she began when he added sugar and coffee to her purchases. "Consider it payment for all those meals you've fed me," he interrupted with a wink that made her heart flutter despite herself. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, a woman's voice called out, "Colin Everett, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you in town for an age." Emma turned to see a handsome woman in an expensive-looking coat approaching, her blonde hair arranged fashionably beneath a feathered hat. "Mrs. Harrison," Colin acknowledged with a polite nod. "Good to see you. And who might this be, Mrs.?" Harrison asked, her curious gaze sweeping over Emma and the children. "Emma Anderson and her children, Sarah and Thomas," Colin said. "Miss Anderson, this is Mrs. Victoria Harrison. Her husband owns the bank." "Charmed," Mrs. Harrison said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Anderson. Wasn't that the name of that poor homesteader who passed last fall?" Emma stiffened. "My late husband, yes. How tragic," Mrs. Harrison murmured, her eyes darting between Emma and Colin with renewed interest. "And how fortunate you found assistance." The insinuation in her tone was unmistakable, and Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mrs. Harrison," Colin said, his voice carrying a warning edge, "Miss Anderson is managing her homestead admirably. I'm merely being neighborly as anyone would." "Of course, Mrs." Harrison replied with a knowing smile. "Well, I won't keep you. Do give my regards to your ranch hands. That young Tyler is quite the dancer. He promised me the first waltz at the spring social." After she sauntered away, Emma released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She seems formidable. Colin's expression was grim. She enjoys gossip more than most enjoy breathing. I apologize for her implications. It's fine, Emma said, though in truth the encounter had shaken her. People will talk regardless of what we do or don't do. The ride home was quieter, both adults lost in thought while the children, tired from their adventure, dozed in the back of the wagon beneath a pile of blankets. Does it bother you? Colin asked finally. What people might say, Emma considered the question carefully. It would bother me if it harmed the children in any way, otherwise. She shrugged. I've learned that living according to others' expectations is rarely satisfying. Colin's smile was slow and appreciative. You continue to surprise me, Emma Anderson. Is that good or bad? She asked, attempting lightness. Very good, he replied, his gaze warm upon her face. Very good indeed. As February gave way to March, the first hints of spring began to emerge from beneath the melting snow. Green shoots pushed through the earth, and the days grew longer and milder. Colin's visits remained constant, and with each one, the connection between him and Emma deepened. He began helping with more substantial projects around the homestead, repairing the roof where winter snow had damaged it, reinforcing the chicken coop, tilling the garden in preparation for planting. The children trailed after him like eager puppies, absorbing his knowledge about animals and the land, thriving under his attention and care. Emma watched their growing attachment with a mixture of joy and trepidation. She couldn't deny her own feelings for Colin any longer the way her heart raced when she spotted him riding toward the cabin, the comfort she found in their conversations by the fire, the dreams that left her flushed and breathless in the privacy of night. But allowing herself to love again meant risking loss again, and the memory of grief was still sharp enough to give her pause. One mild evening in late March, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while the children played in the yard, Colin broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. Spring planting will be starting soon, he said, his tone carefully casual. Have you given thought to what you'll put in this year? Emma nodded. The usual potatoes, beans, corn, some squash and tomatoes if I can get the seedlings started properly. That's a lot of work for one person, Colin observed, especially with two young ones to care for. We managed last year, Emma said, though the memory of those exhausting days made her shoulders ache. We'll manage again. Colin was silent for a moment, then said, I've been thinking, Emma, about the future, your future, the children's future, and mine. Emma's heart began to pound. Oh. My ranch is doing well, he continued, staring out at the purpling horizon. Better than well, actually. I've added 50 head of cattle this year, improved the bloodlines of my horses. The house is bigger than I need, honestly 4 bedrooms when I only use one. He turned to face her, his expression earnest. What I'm trying to say poorly, it seems, is that there's room for more than just me, room for a family. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Colin, I know it's soon, he hurried on. I know you're still healing from losing James. But Emma, these past months, being with you and the children, it's shown me what I've been missing, what I want. He reached for her hand, cradling it between both of his. I love you, Emma Anderson. I think I started falling in love with you that day in the snow when you were determined to bring your children a Christmas tree no matter the cost. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you've created a home filled with love despite everything you've faced. Tears filled Emma's eyes, spilling over onto her cheeks. Colin, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. Take all the time you need, but know that I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. And if you're ready, I want to build a life with you, all of you. Emma looked at their joined hands, then at the children playing happily in the yard, then back at Colin's face open, honest, filled with love and hope. In that moment, all her fears seemed smaller than the possibilities stretching before her. I love you too, she whispered, the words both terrifying and liberating. I think I have for months now. Colin's smile was radiant as he leaned forward, hesitating just inches from her lips. May I? Emma nodded, and his lips met hers in a gentle kiss that quickly deepened, years of loneliness and longing pouring into this first tender connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Colin rested his forehead against hers. Is that a yes, then? He asked, his voice husky. Emma laughed softly. That's a yes. They were married in April when the wildflowers carpeted the prairie in bursts of color. The ceremony took place in the Laramie Church, with half the town in attendance, some out of genuine goodwill, others, like Mrs. Harrison, out of curiosity. Emma wore a new dress of soft blue calico, and the children were scrubbed and polished in their best clothes, beaming with excitement. The move to Colin's ranch went smoothly, the children adapting quickly to their new home. Sarah claimed a bedroom with a window seat overlooking the pastures, while Thomas was enchanted by the barn and its inhabitants, especially General the goat, who proved to be every bit as ornery as Colin had described. Emma's small homestead wasn't abandoned. They decided to keep it as a legacy for the children when they grew older. And in the meantime, Colin's ranch hands used the cabin when working that section of land. Summer brought abundant crops from their expanded garden, and Emma found herself humming as she preserved fruits and vegetables for the coming winter. The fear of scarcity had eased, replaced by a comfortable security she hadn't known since before James fell ill. Colin proved to be a patient and loving father to Sarah and Thomas, teaching them to ride, to identify animal tracks, to respect the land that provided their livelihood. He never tried to replace the memory of their father, but instead created his own unique bond with each child. In October, Emma shared news that brought tears of joy to Colin's eyes. They would be welcoming a new addition to their family in the spring. That Christmas, as they gathered around a magnificent pine tree that Colin and Thomas had selected together, Emma looked around at her expanded family and marveled at how much had changed in just 1 year. "What are you thinking?" Colin asked, coming to sit beside her on the sofa, his arms sliding comfortably around her shoulders. "I was thinking about last Christmas," Emma replied, leaning into his embrace. "About trudging through the snow, determined to find a tree for the children." "The day that brought us together," Colin said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was so focused on surviving then," Emma mused. "Just getting through each day, each challenge. I never imagined finding love again. And now—" Colin prompted, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. Emma smiled, turning to kiss him properly. "Now I'm not just surviving, I'm living, truly living." Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. But inside, surrounded by the family she had found and made, Emma Anderson Everett was warm, safe, and deeply, completely loved. When spring arrived, bringing with it new calves, fresh green grass, and the birth of their daughter, Claire, Emma and Colin stood on the porch of their home, watching Sarah and Thomas race across the yard, their laughter carried on the warm breeze. "Did you ever imagine this?" Colin asked, his arm around Emma's waist as she cradled their sleeping infant. "When you set out through the snow that day, did you ever think you'd find more than just a Christmas tree?" Emma looked up at him, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had appeared in her life when she needed him most. "Never," she admitted, "but I'm eternally grateful that I did." Colin bent to kiss her, gentle and reverent. "So am I, my love, so am I." And as the Wyoming sun set behind the distant mountains, casting golden light across their land, Emma knew with absolute certainty that the journey she had begun on that cold December day, a desperate mother determined to bring joy to her children, had led her not just to a Christmas tree, but to a love and a life more beautiful than she could have ever imagined.